Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name's Josh Hodges. I'm the host of Online with an Architect, and we're here today with Chris Mutchler. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Josh, for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
So a bit of a new concept for me, hosting a podcast, but thanks for giving me your time. So you're one of the very few VCDXs in the world, so it's great to speak to really smart people. Just quick intro on yourself and tell us about your VCDX journey.
Sure. So I'm Chris Mutchler. I'm based out of the United States, currently living in Colorado, so up in the mountains. My journey, I think, is actually kind of interesting. I only started using VMware technologies in 2013, and I think I met my first VCDX that same year. I was working for Adobe at the time, and at the time it seemed like this way far off, like aspirational goal to have. And then 2 years later, I was working at VMware on an architecture team where everyone that I worked for had at least one VCDX. So there was a lot of peer pressure, put on me to get it. And so I did. I got it. I think I got it fairly quickly. I got it in 2017. And it was great.
That's well done. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm an operations guy. I think when I talk to people, this is the thing that I stress the most, is that I started out in the 97 working in the industry. And I was working in data centers. I was building out data centers. And I've kind of had the opportunity to manage all sizes of environments. So I've worked for web hosting companies where we started out with a few hundred web servers that grew to thousands. I worked at Adobe for a while, where at one point the group that I was in, we had a global footprint of 120,000 bare metal servers, which is, I think, just on the extreme scale there at the other end, and the challenges that introduced, to then getting to work on the virtual side and creating private clouds, internal data centers, and seeing those grow from, basically from scratch all the way up to, tens of thousands of VMs in a very short period of time, to then working at VMware on the internal cloud team, where we had 750,000 virtual machines running. And so this was the group that did all the hands-on labs every year for everybody at the conferences and stuff. So I've kind of been able to see that whole breadth. And so when I look at anything VCDX related, enterprise architecture, whatever it is, I come from that operations viewpoint, where, like what you were asking a few minutes ago, the differences between architects, I think, is drastic, right? And there are good architects everywhere. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but there are paper architects, and then there are guys like me who are operational architects, and we can have two entirely different viewpoints on a lot of things, and the way it colors what we do, especially around the decisions we make for when we're helping customers or doing it for our own companies. I take a very practical approach to everything. I very much I subscribe to the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid, when it comes to architecture, because you can introduce a lot of cool technology, you can introduce a lot of complexity in the environment, but at the end of the day, it doesn't work, then all of that complexity was for nothing. So if you can solve it just with a screwdriver, just use a screwdriver. Don't get an impact gun, for it, type of thing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I like that you come from the ops background. People always ask me, how do you make decisions? And I always put myself as the person who's going to look after the environment. Do I want to look after this design? If the answer is no, then I don't think I've done a good job. So that's how I look at it from a really simplistic view. And of course, the KISS principle is a no-brainer. So, yeah.
Yeah, and exactly that, right? If I'm working with a customer, because now that's really what I do in my role, is I work with customers now and help them with this stuff. I'm not doing it day in and day out like I used to, but I come at it from, if we're not putting something together that you're willing to own and operate for an extended period of time, then we're not doing it correctly, right? Because, I mean, you hear the thing all the time, like, oh, this is only going to ever live in test, right? And then it ends up in a production environment, and we end up as operations people supporting it for 5, 6, 7 years. And a lot of people, when they don't have that background, when they design certain things, they'll look at it like, well, it's a day zero thing, like it's a greenfield environment. It's like, no. What is that decision going to look like 4 or 5 years from now when that environment is still running and it's still the lifeblood of whatever the organization is doing? That you have to be able to look in the distance and see what this thing is, what the implications of the design we're doing and all of that. So yeah, I think that's so many people don't understand that. Like it's just like
incredibly frustrating.
Day zero's easy. Talk to me about day 1000. What does it still look like at day 1000? Right? Is it still working or did you break it? So
I think you hit the key word, is the implications. So what is the implication of what we're doing today, in a month, in a year, in 5 years? That's something I really like doing in design decisions, is putting implications for decisions. Because as you well know, we make a decision, it might, cause a ripple effect, or the butterfly effect, I think it's called, down the whole design. And we have to redo things or redesign things. And it's very important. And for me, having a table which has your requirements, your risks, constraints, assumptions, all these things, and implications makes my job easy, because it just reminds me to think about all these steps and then go, oh, what is the implication of that? And then I think for a couple of minutes and I go, oh, actually, no, I don't want a piece of that. So, that's why I design the way I do, is because it actually makes what I produce consistent, higher quality, means I don't forget something. And the document it produces, is of a high standard. So people say, oh, this table's quite timely to fill out. Yeah, maybe it is. But you get it right, it's better than fixing it like in a year's time. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I do the same thing, right? And I think John's book that they wrote a few years ago, and that book came out like right as I was in the middle of getting my VCDX. And I remember writing my documentation, and others out in the community, there's a lot of people out there who've posted stuff. I've posted stuff on my blog, and Derek Seaman, I think at one point he had like a table of contents that I looked at. There's a lot of great resources out there, but I think the table that John and them put in that book, the IT Foundation Infrastructure Art, I always butchered the title, but it's the best book ever. But
the exact one. And John and I spoke about it recently. So there'll be an episode on that.
Yeah, but the table in there, and that was one of the things that I took to heart, because at the time, like I said, I was working internally at VMware on an architecture team for the internal cloud team, and everybody that I worked with was a VCDX except for me and one other guy, and we would have these Monday calls where if we had to make a design decision for something that had to change in the environment, it was like a bloodbath. Okay, like everybody was just beating everybody up. You went to this thing and you came out black and blue. And some people would look at that and be like, well, that's a hostile work environment. That's miserable. But no, it actually makes you better, because we, around the table, like you start thinking about what are the implications of this thing that I'm doing, right? What risks have I introduced, right? Have I introduced new risks by making this design decision? I always added, like, operationally, what is this going to change for the operations teams who have to own it, right? It's not just a design decision for like, hey, I'm turning on this new configuration, or I'm, modifying the VDS in this way or whatever. It's what does that mean for downstream, right? All of the individuals who are going to touch this architecture. And then the other big thing that I got keyed in on, in addition to the implications thing, was what other alternatives did you consider before you decided on this decision? And I don't know if you talked about this in the others, but this is a big part, I think, that candidates for the VCDX don't understand, is that when you get your VCDX and you present your design and the panel's beating you up about everything you said, it's not about whether your decision was right or wrong. It's understanding, why did you make the decision you did? And for me, a lot of that is, what alternatives did I consider? Because I might be here now, but I might not be here 3 years from now. And when they have to go back and revisit that, they don't have the context, right, that I had necessarily. So having things like the implications, the operational changes, and then the alternatives that you considered, because the alternative today might be the wrong decision. But if it's an integration challenge, or just a product gets better, or, a technology like vSAN, right? Like vSAN scene performance differences, right? All over the years, right? It was one thing 5 years ago. It's a different thing today. And it's going to be, hopefully better in the future type thing. So maybe you didn't use vSAN 5 years ago because it wasn't ready, but now you look at what ESA is capable of it and it is ready, right? So that design decision might have to get revisited. And you want to give people context of why did you make that decision that you made? And did you think everything through instead of just saying like, oh, well, I saw so-and-so blog about this, so I'm just going to copy what they did without actually understanding, the reasons behind everything. So,
yeah, I think so. Alternatives is such a good one as well, because when you present to a customer, it makes your job easy. They say, oh, why are we doing that? And you say, well, look, here were the 5 things I considered. I eliminated this one really early on because look, that's just not going to work. It's not going to be functional. This next option was going to cost you a fortune, and so on and so forth. So
yeah,
alternatives are important to consider. And like you say, if it's a product decision, then you've got to look at the product capabilities today versus what it might be in the next version or the next architecture. And yeah, it may well be viable, not viable today and viable the next day. So yeah, very important. So yeah, I'm just smiling and almost giggling like a schoolgirl because I love talking this stuff. So
well, and I love doing what I do, and I've loved doing it for years now. But I mean, the thing that I love the most about it is, an architecture is not one and done, right? Like I'm not going to put something to paper, hand it to somebody, a customer or another team at VMware and say, okay, here you go. You're never going to touch this thing again, right? There's a life cycle to it, right? And being able to understand that like, hey, we need to be constantly evaluating ourselves, evaluating the architecture, evaluating ourselves operationally. How are we doing? And, how have the business requirements changed or just financial, conditions? Are we suddenly now in a recession where before it was just buy as much hardware as you want and just throw it out there and we're happy? But now it's like, we're only utilizing everything at 30% and now we can't spend any money. So what do we have to do to change it so that we can, consume servers better, more efficiently or whatever it might be, right? So it's this constant iteration on everything that we do that nothing is ever truly done, I don't think. Especially when you talk about, like we said, like if you have to own something and it's going to live in a data center or a cloud for 5, 6, 7 years, there's no way at year 6 is that thing going to look the same way that it did in year 1. And if it did, then you're probably doing something wrong, both from an architecture perspective and a business perspective, if you're sitting something out there and it's never changing over that time. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point earlier, you mentioned that you've got to be able to hand that document to someone else, and it makes sense. And it makes sense even in 3 years when someone's read it and you're long gone, you're at a new company, new role, whatever. So I always call that the hit by the bus test. So if I can be hit by a bus, and many people would cheer, but if I get hit by a bus, my architecture should be able to be easily interpreted by another architect of similar experience. So
yeah.
That's also my goal. So when someone reads one of my documents and they ask me a question, I'm almost a bit offended because I haven't put enough information in there that they've actually had to come back to me.
Yeah, and it's a balancing act, right? I mean, if you hand somebody a 300-page document, are they going to read all 300 pages? Probably not. So you have to balance like, hey, I've summarized everything in the very beginning that somebody could just take it, look through it, and basically understand what I'm doing from A to Z, right? And then the rest of the document is that longer term, like Chris got hit by a bus. Why did he make that one decision? Let me go through and look through the documentation to figure out maybe all of the technical detail behind it and stuff. But yeah, the hit by the bus test, it amazes me how many customers would fail like that. Like if they have a few key people in certain areas that if those people, just even if it just didn't get hit by a bus, but just retired, right? Mm-hmm. Like if they retired and it's like, okay, now who's going to run that part of your business? They would fail miserably.
Yeah. And I don't think that's a knock on any individual person. That's just a trend in the market that documentation usually at the start is done to a reasonable standard, but from there onwards, it falls right off.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not updated and maintained to a reasonable standard. So, that's a really simple area from a business continuity perspective, making sure when you're making changes, you go through a change review process, which oftentimes are not very the process is very cumbersome, but the material and the artifacts you have to produce for those, a lot of the time, is minimal. So making sure those things are done to a higher standard will just help down the track.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is I think about, I mean, I've been doing this for 25, 26 years now. And early on in my career, it was always about being a rock star, right? Like you always wanted to be the rock star in your group, which meant that you were probably the person that if you got hit by a bus, the rest of the group would be screwed, right? And so we have to kind of change that mentality. And I think that that's one of the things over the last few years that I realized is that like it's not that you can have everybody be a rock star because that's probably just unrealistic, but you've got to have more than one. And you really want a culture where the one is mentoring the others, right? And sharing that information, because it really was. And I think especially like you got your VCDX early on and you weren't even, I don't think you were at VMware when you got yours, right? Were you with a customer at the time or something?
I was with IBM.
Okay.
So yeah, it was kind of at a vendor, but
yeah,
it was, I didn't really have anyone to mentor me. I actually did all my study, preparation, exam work, whatever, with James Worth, who's a member of my team now. And that to me was a godsend, because he was able to, or we were able to challenge each other. We were at a similar skill set at the start, and we're at a similar skill set now because we took that journey together. Our strengths and weaknesses, we always challenged each other. So that concept of working with someone and having a buddy and doing mock panels, I think maybe I spoke to John Arazid about it, and I think that's why we decided to go down that route for our preparation. But it was such a huge help. Like, there's no way I would have passed VCDX without James there, and the challenge of having someone test your decisions and work through things. So yeah, if anyone pursuing it, get a study buddy. It's a huge help.
Yeah, get a study buddy, get a mentor. I mean, I was fortunate, but my point was that you look at all the early numbers, right? Like sub 200 number guys. And for the most part, it is guys, unfortunately, but that's changed a little bit. But I mean, they were all rock stars, right? They were people that you saw at VMworld. They were the people that were, for a lot of them, they were the most active in the V community. They were at VMugs, and they kind of had that like rock star persona. And so that was, for me at least, that was, again, you want to kind of be part of the in crowd. And so that was, a motivating factor for me to get mine as well. But yeah, and then to your point, like I had great mentors. I mean, I shared an office with Simon Long for 3 years in Palo Alto when I first joined VMware. And that was the best thing ever for me, especially because Simon and I, totally different career type background. Like he was very much a professional services person, not just the EUC side of it, but just he was a professional services guy. He had never really owned or operated a data center the way that I had. And so we would sit in this office in Palo Alto, and I was studying for my VCDX and trying to get prepared for it and working on all my documentation. And we would just have these great conversations back and forth all day long about like, well, why would you do that? And I'd be like, what do you mean, why would I do that? Like, have you ever seen something like this blow? Like, I remember like a one argument we had, and actually had it with even my senior director at the time, who was Brian Smith, and he was a VCDX2 and a panelist at the time. And it was over spreading out edge clusters essentially across multiple racks. Because I'd actually been in a data center where the entire data center like lost power to an entire aisle at one point. And so I was like, you have to have redundancy across racks, across aisles for all of these things. He was like, no, power will never fail. That'll never happen. Like that was his stance, Brian's stance. It will never happen. And we had this like drawn out, heated argument like with him and Simon and Tom Ralph at the time. And I was like, well, you're my boss. If you don't want me to design for this, then I won't include it in my design, but I'm telling you, you're wrong, right? Like my operational experience tells me that, yes, this can actually happen. An entire aisle can lose power. The backup generators will not come on. The battery will fail, whatever it is. Like you will lose an entire rack or an entire aisle. And if you do, and you haven't built in redundancies across aisles or across data center rooms, like you're asking for, for some pain. And he was like, no, it will never, ever, ever happen.
I love those discussions. They're so much fun.
Yeah.
Especially with smart people, like Simon and Brian. So Brian and I actually did our VCDX defense in Toronto together.
Okay.
So he and I, we're talking to Mark Brunstad, just a bit of a side note, right? A bit of a funny story. So we're talking to Mark Brunstad, who I'd never met at the time. And Mark was telling me I'm crazy. I've got my little, baby daughter with me, right? Because I'm a single dad. What am I going to do, right? So I got my little baby daughter with me and a friend to look after her while I did the panel. And then, so we're talking, and I'm like, I really need to go to the bathroom. Like, I was super nervous. And Brian's like, yeah, I need to go too. And I kind of looked at him and I'm like, so, nothing funny. But yeah, so that was cool. So we both went to the bathroom and right before our defenses. So I think he's number 91 and I'm 90. Well, he might be 80, but we're like one apart, I think. So yeah, Brian's a really smart guy. It was really nice meeting him at that in that experience as well, where we're all sort of a bit on edge, ready for this defense.
Yeah. And I think, and for the people listening, right, like the thing is they don't remember, it's not about being right. Like it wasn't that Brian was wrong and I was right, even though I will always say that I was right in this instance.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But it was just that like and this was the best thing about Simon was that we could have these conversations, and because of our careers, right, and how our careers had led us to the point of becoming enterprise architects, getting our VCDXs, that we just had different perspectives, right? Like different things had influenced us. And I'm sure if you and I had some crazy conversations, like stuff in your career will have influenced you differently than it will have influenced me. And we will just see things differently. And I think that's the best thing about overall, like what we get to do is that I think for the most part, there's no two people alike when it comes to this. But we can have these conversations. We'll agree on most things, I think, but there'll be certain things where it's like, well, I would do that differently. And you would be like, well, I would have done it this way. And it's not that one person's right and one person's wrong. It's just that there are so many different ways to build a good architecture. Right. I mean, and there's lots of reference architectures out there, whether you're doing a VMware stack or an AWS stack or an Azure stack, there's all those reference architectures out there. And the thing that I tell people all the time is that's a starting point. That's like if every condition was ideal for you in both organizationally within your business, from a technology standpoint, that's a starting point. You have to understand how to be able to take a reference architecture and actually design it to your business needs and to the reality of the environment that you're working in at the time. And how you go about that is going to be unique for the most part. But as long as you understand why you're doing what you're doing, why you're making the decisions you're making, and you can articulate and communicate that to people, I think that's what makes so many of us. I think that's why when we all get in a room, we can have a great conversation because we all have the similar background there, and we can all do these things. So, and we can all talk for hours on it.
Yeah, as we said before I started recording, I've interviewed a bunch of people so far on this podcast, and I've never done podcasting before, as is probably very evident. But I find it really easy to talk to other VCDXs. Just similar topics. We both, throw information in, and it's so easy. So I'm not prepared at all in this case for this call. As I jokingly said to you, I lost all my notes. So very natural conversation, very easy. So. But what I wanted to touch on was you mentioned, like with Simon, for example, you were challenging each other. You both had different backgrounds, and obviously Simon's a brilliant guy. So you're coming from different perspectives, but you're both using a consistent methodology for the most part, and that's bringing you together. As opposed to, sometimes in companies there's a bit of conflict. Whereas I've never really met a VCDX who couldn't admit that, oh, maybe that was a better way to do something, or yeah, I really should have considered that. I think all of us kind of go, well, we're all at a certain level where we can benefit from each other. Let's sort of rise the tide together. And that's what I really enjoy is every time I speak to a VCDX, especially recently, I've spoke to a lot. Obviously, I've got 3 on my team. It's very, very, very humbling, first of all, to think that I'm part of that group of such smart people. And then also it's just, you learn straight away. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate. I've been at VMware just over 8 years now. And like I said, that first team that I joined, it was Brian, it was Tom, it was Simon. And they were all, at the time, like I come into this team and I'm like, holy crap, like how am I on this team? Right. Like just that imposter syndrome to a certain degree. But they challenge you. And then I was blessed that I got to move on from that team to another, it had so many different names, but it's essentially like a customer success architecture team under John McGinn. And there I found myself in a situation again where I was working with, I think of the 10 or 11 of us that were on the team, 8 of us had our VCDXs. So it was like Mandy Botsko, it was Jason Carnes, it was Jeff Wong, it was Paul McSherry, it was Phil Monk, it was all these people. And so I was fortunate that I got to go from like one great team to an even greater team. And you, again, like you said, like we all fit right in together because we do all have that common experience behind it. And that framework, I think, really just guides a lot of what we do, not just from like a work product perspective, but just also how we think about things. That it's so easy to have conversations with all of these various people who are all extremely smart. And I always say, like, if you don't feel like you're the dumbest person in the room, then you're doing something wrong. Like, I always want to feel like the dumbest person in the room. And I hope that the guy next to me is looking at me thinking that he's the dumbest person in the room. You know what I mean? Because you want to always be pushing each other and working with good people. So,
yeah, 100%. I've been very lucky to work with a lot of VCDXs over the years. At IBM, I worked with 2 VCDXs, although not really directly. We didn't have a huge amount of interaction, unfortunately, but still we did do some work together. And then, my last role, there was like 20 VCDXs. So, anytime there was an opportunity in a job opening, I'm like, we should hire another VCDX because these people just made us better. So,
well, and that was the joke for a long time. Yeah. Josh, right? It's like, oh, you get your VCDX, put it on Twitter, and Nutanix is going to send you a job offering.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not far from the truth. I mean, the thing is, if you're a really smart person, which obviously all the VCDXs have proved, I mean, they say it's like a minimally qualified candidate, but that minimum bar is pretty high. So, if you're at that level, I think companies are crazy not to consider hiring you. I think obviously VCDXs are not cheap resources to have.
Yeah.
But the value that you get from that resource is incredible. So, a lot of the time internally, it was just a debate about, are we really going to pay that level for this role? And I was always of the opinion, well, we're trying to build a market. Like, do we want to succeed? Like, do we want to stack the deck in our favor? If the answer is yes, then here's a list of 5 people, right? You could pick one at random and they're going to do an amazing job. So, and turned out that was the case. So, yeah, I've been very lucky because I've learned a huge amount from those guys. And when you build a product, I remember, at Nutanix, one of the first things I did was we wanted to run it through basically the certification benchmark for NFS for the vSphere certification for support reasons. And, the test was trying to test a SAN. So, when I ran the tests, obviously 90% of the tests failed because the architecture it's testing is just not there. So it's just not there to be tested, right? So I was like, how do we even get this testing tool that was written for a SAN to even function? And then once it functions, which tests are actually relevant? And how can we prove to VMware that this product is resilient and it complies with all the various policies and procedures and whatever? And that was such an interesting thing because I'm talking to Webster, and I'm talking to other VCDXs, and I'm like, how do we even make this do that? And, VMware were really good. I showed them the results and I showed them which tests wouldn't work, explained why and all this sort of stuff. And, we got it certified. But, that was one of those out of the box thinking moments where I'm working with a technology that's new and being developed and an architecture that's brand new. How do you certify it? How do you prove something that's brand new is working correctly? Like, it's a difficult process. So following a good methodology made that easier to present back to VMware, who were quite rightly skeptical, right? Because it's a new technology. They don't want their customers to have a bad experience. So they want to be very thorough with that certification. So yeah, that was a fun project.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things too, that, like you said, like you had to figure out how to adapt, the tool to meet the needs of a new technology. And I think that that's the thing. Like, I've been doing pure architecture work for 8 years now, a little over 8 years. And there are times where I have to be very technical, right? And be able to get down in the weeds on things because that's what's needed at the time. And then there's other times where the architecture side really kind of lends itself more to the business side of things, right? And it's less about the nitty gritty technical, and it's more about how are we going to evolve, how's the architecture going to help you evolve your business? How are you going to get better operations, right? How are we going to make life cycle easier for you? How are we going to streamline your data centers and consumption for your end users, whether they're internal customers or external customers? And I think that's one of the things that when we get to a point in our careers, especially if you latch on to architecture as your career path, you have to understand that you've got to be able to flip back and forth between the technical and the non-technical. And there are going to be times where you have to say like, okay, there's new technology out here. How is this going to change the landscape of what I've been doing, previously? Whether it's a new storage technology or something like, Kubernetes or big data or whatever it has been over the last 5, 6, 8, 10 years, there's been so many rapid changes. How am I going to adopt public cloud when I've traditionally been everything's in my own data center where I control it 100%? How do I now help the business understand the value, to start consuming a cloud service or cloud services? How do I get my applications to understand that they have to change, how they've been doing things? Because now they have to care less about the infrastructure, right? And they're just going to consume a service that I'm providing to them and so forth. And I think that's the thing that I love the most about what we get to do is like we get to do kind of everything on the spectrum there day in and day out. And we get that variety, right? And I think, and this is the other thing I would tell people is I think one of the things that sets people who go for the VCDX and get it and other architecture certifications like the NPX or TOGAF or whatever it is that we're all continuous learners, right? It's not like we've reached a point where we're like, okay, I'm done. I don't need to know anything else. I'm good, right? Like we're all continuous learners. We're all continuing to push ourselves in everything that we do. And I think that's one of the things that sets a lot of us apart. And to your point, like, I'd like to think I'm a huge benefit to my customers because I have these certifications, right? And because I have this philosophy around how I do things, but I really do think that that's one of those big differentiators for us. And it was certainly one of the things that I saw in others like Simon when I was going through it, that like, oh, I need to get better at that. I need to, incorporate that just into everything that I do. So
you've hit the nail on the head. I think, differentiating yourself from others is kind of what the VCDX somewhat represents. It's people who, like you say, continuous learning, challenge themselves to a very high standard and continue to evolve over time. So that's exactly why I started my company end to end, is because I wanted that difference. I feel like that's the gap in the market. VCDX has filled that gap beautifully. And even if it's a project where it's not VMware specific, it's that thought process and methodology and approach that's the value to the customer. And again, you mentioned about enterprise architecture versus solution architecture, right? The enterprise side is a methodology. It's not a technical piece. So VCDXs can talk at that level very well, in my experience. And then, take it all the way through to a solution and life cycle and all these key components. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I love that whole spectrum, as you called it.
Yeah. And it's been, like the role that I'm in now at VMware. So I don't know, I switched to the dark side. I went pre-sales in the last year, which is something I never thought I'd see myself doing, where a lot of that is traditionally just the solutions architecture side of it. It's like, hey, here's this reference architecture. Here's what you should do. But then there's like a handoff from like the pre-sales architect to like somebody, a PSO architect, who's actually going to take a statement of work and take that high level 30,000 foot view, and they're going to come up with the documentation and show you how to implement it and everything. And so I think the interesting thing for me is in this role is that I came into, it was like, well, I don't just do the one thing here. I do all of the things here, and getting individuals to understand that like there is a difference between solutions architecture and enterprise architecture. I'll have these conversations where somebody will be like, So we need to talk to somebody about, we want to do AVS, and we want to figure out how to integrate it with our on-prem data center. So who do you know that can talk about it? Like, well, I can talk. I can talk about it.
It's
I don't
me. It's
need.
me.
Yeah, it's me. Like, that's all you need. Like, you just need me. And they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah. So I think that's one of the things that I challenge people. If you want to be a solutions architect your whole career, I think you can. And I think you can be super successful at it. I think the thing that drove me was I wanted to do more than just that. I wanted to be able to have the conversation with a CIO or a CTO all the way down to the SRE who's implementing it, right? And be able to have that same conversation, one conversation in the morning and then go sit in a meeting in the afternoon and have the other half of the conversation and be able to do
Absolutely.
both. So.
And that's a great example of the value of a VCDX level person, is that they can do that whole process. Yeah. So it's not handing off from one to another. We have the concept of Chinese whispers, and I have a slightly different view to the SRE or to the enterprise architect or whatever. So yeah, I think the value of a person who can do that. I always used to say end to end in my career, by the way. That's where the company name came from. Where someone can do that end to end process is extremely valuable. So yeah. It's great to be able to do that. And I think it's difficult to do that in a larger organization because people are siloed, and it might not be intentionally to constrain that person, but unfortunately larger organizations do things the way they do. And, no matter how talented a person is, they're put in a box. And it's like in your case, someone might think you're just pre-sales, and you have to really champion that. No, I can actually take you on this whole journey.
Yeah.
So I think this is what, from my perspective, is a huge problem in the market, is people are put into a pre-sales role who are very talented, and then they're stopped. They're not allowed to go further, even when they have all the skills and capabilities. And the worst part about that, or that there's two things I think is really bad about that. The actual individual who's really talented, who can do that whole process, starts to lose their skills over time because they're not allowed to go down that route. And also the customer doesn't get that higher level of value they could have got from that resource who's very capable. So it's kind of a lose-lose. And then, in fact, the third one is the company. The outcome the company is delivering isn't as good. So, that employee might want to leave or change roles or get frustrated, lose motivation, whatever. So I think the industry needs to change in that regard, where you have these very talented people, especially with Fortune 1000 type customers. You can't just be handing off between 10 different teams and having 10 people in a meeting. It's too difficult to arrange the meeting. The meetings take too long. There's too much blah, blah, blah. Similar to our call right now, a bit of blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's too much blah, blah, blah. And there's too many context switches when you have a large team. Whereas if you've just got that one lead who can then guide the broader team, the meetings can get done quicker, they can be more dynamic, and I think the outcome is very easily measured to be a lot better.
No, and you are 100% right. Especially, I mean, I've loved working at VMware, and like I said, I've been here for 8 years. I was at NTT early on in my career for like 10 years, and I swore to myself when I left that I would never stay that long at a company again. And then I went to a startup that got bought by Adobe, and I ended up being at Adobe for about 5 years before I was like, okay, I'm not doing NTT again. I got to jump. I got to figure out what's the next thing. And I was like, okay, so like VMware. And again, I was influenced by a lot of people that I had met, like Andrew Nielsen. He was an early VCDX. I think he's like 30 something or other. Like he was, I was living in Utah at the time. And so there were a lot of like local Utah people. Andrew was one of them. Brian Graff was another one that I got to know, and they were all like, oh, you should come to VMware, And so I was like, okay, like I'll go, but I'm not spending more than 3 or 4 years there. Right. And then you get into a company and you realize that, at least for me, the culture is unique enough that there's this mentality of like, you can stay here for a long period of time. It doesn't mean you have to do the same job. You can actually bounce. And I'm on my 4th role in 8 years. So, I mean, just think about that for a while. I mean, like I've been able to kind of go through it, but it is hard for even the customers that I work with, it's hard for them to fathom having and architect at our level inside their own organization. And I've worked with some of VMware's largest, most strategic logos that you can think of over the last 5 or 6 years. And the ones that I have a peer at, we are far more successful than the ones where there's no leadership at the top or no singular vision being led by an enterprise architect at that level. Because when that person doesn't exist, then everybody else underneath them, for the most part, are fighting over their own domain, right? And they're just looking at it like, what is my slice? And this is what I'm focused on. And I don't really care what that means to the other 2 groups that I interact with day to day that are, consuming my services or whatever it might be. But the organizations that have an enterprise architect in their organization, either reports to like a senior director of IT or a CIO, or whatever it might be, job title, when they're the singular person, or maybe they even have a team of them, 2 or 3 of them, when they have that organizational structure, it's so much easier for me to be able to go in and us to be able to be successful long-term, because you get to have this same kind of conversation with the customer, where it's like we're thinking about things for the most part in the same way, and we can be successful because we're taking that holistic view of, here's everything underneath of us that we have to be concerned with, and we've got to make sure that it all plays nicely with one another. So that's when I reached out to you a couple months ago on Twitter. I was most interested when I saw your end to end. I was like, I wonder if he's doing just this thing, because I think this is something that lacks. I'll be honest, it lacks at VMware, and I think it lacks at a lot of customers, that they don't have this view of, hey, we need this type of person or this type of team to own it. And at a company like VMware, like you said, I mean, it's huge. I mean, there's 30,000+ people. We probably have, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 architects between pre-sales and post-sales and PSO. I mean, there's thousands of architects out there, but it's very hard for VMware to be able to say like, oh, we're going to have this enterprise architecture team, and they're going to be the ones to go talk to our customers. It's hard, because I get it. I mean,
yeah, look, big companies, it's hard. It's not really a criticism of VMware. It's just when you get to scale, it's very difficult to manage.
Yeah.
What I'm doing at my company, and one of the things that I've seen in my career is people at a VCDX level very rarely work directly with a customer as an employee, because it's just not challenging enough for them, right? So it's just you work there for a couple of years, you do a great job, and then you move on, do that again. Fair enough, that happens. But very rarely do you have a VCDX that's with a customer for 5+ years.
Yeah.
And one of the services end-to-end offers is the idea of that virtual architect, right? So it's not, you don't engage for a month to do some architecture and wave bye-bye and it's done. No. Put us on a retainer for whatever level of effort you think you need, whether it's 0.25 or it's a full-time employer, or it's multiple if you're a very large customer. And then we will handle that for you. We'll work with your team as if we are part of your team. But better still, let's say I'm the lead for customer X, or X is actually Twitter now, so I can't say well, let's say Twitter, fine.
That might be a good job, actually. Enterprise architect for X next.
Yeah. So, Elon, if X needs enterprise architecture, here's 2 good guys. But like if this company X, were to engage in that model, and they would have a lead, let's say that lead is me. Well, if I don't have the skill set in a certain area, I'm lucky my team is super deep in technical talent. So I can just slot that person in and say, hey, this is the area we need to cover. Boom. Whereas a customer would have to hire like 2, 3, 4, 5 people to cover that breadth of technology and knowledge, which is unrealistic. It's too expensive. If you're paying a VCDX level person or an enterprise architect level person, they're very attractive salaries. They're very competitive in the market. You just can't afford to have 3 or 4 in most companies. Maybe very large companies potentially, but even if you can afford to hire them, you've got to then work out how to challenge them and keep the skills up to date. That's, again, very difficult in a larger organization. So that's exactly what we're providing, is the best of the best, certified with VMware and with Nutanix and other companies like that, TOGAF, and providing you a virtual resource or a pool of resources that you can draw down on. And I think that's a huge gap. I think it's an easy win for customers. there's going to be, peaks where you're going to need 3 people full time for months, and then you taper it off. But then down the track, you've still got access to that level of expertise, even if that individual resource, let's say me, I move on or something. Cool. Well, there's 3 other VCDXs in my team who can slot in for me, right? For sure, I'm redundant, right? I can be replaced by my team, which is the best place to be. So that's the other thing I want to offer to customers, is making sure that they know that they're not dependent on just Josh, right?
Right.
Or just one individual. It's a team providing an outcome, as opposed to an individual that they're just going to hire on a salary, who's going to get bored and leave and take half their IP with them, right? I don't think that works, especially with mission critical environments.
Yeah. Well, and this is a conversation I seem to be having more and more often with internal and internally and externally, is the idea of, like you said, like, we are expensive. I mean, we work hard to be expensive, I is how I look at it. Right. But at the same time, so yeah, maybe you can't have 3 Chris's or 3 Joshes, but you should have a culture inside of your company so that if I'm there, you should have 2 or 3 people in the wings that I should be mentoring, right? That I should be bringing up, so that, yes, if I'm suddenly not challenged any longer and move on, you've got 2 or 3 other individuals there who are ready to step up and take on that challenge, right? And that, I think, that's hard for companies. I worked at one place where we had a VP, and he looked at certifications and training for certifications as, well, I'm just paying for this person to go get the next job. And I was like, that's like the absolute worst mentality to have around this.
Yeah,
like, you should be constantly wanting to enable your teams, because that will then help the new people who come in, and then they see that, oh, those other people that I'm looking up to, those senior leaders in that organization that I'm working for, look, they got to move on to the next thing. Maybe it was the next thing outside of your company, but it might have been the next thing that was inside of your company. If they see that, then that promotes that culture of, like, hey, there's opportunity for me to have growth here, for me to continue my career long-term here. There's mentorship opportunities for me.
Yeah, there's actually a great meme that covers this, and I'll try not to butcher it. If I remember it correctly, it's, what if we train them and they leave? And the response was, what if we don't and they stay? And I
saw
think
that.
really, yeah, I think I've got it right. So
you do.
It's so true. Like, if you have people who are not enabled and they stay at your organization, they may have 20 years of experience, but it's 20 years it's basically 1 year's experience repeated 20 times,
yes.
Which is not 20 years experience. That's 1 year of experience in total value. So unless you're enabling and challenging your staff, yeah, they're going to reduce in value to the point where they're probably going to be quite of a liability, in fact. So yeah, enablement's critical. I mean, my company is 4 people, right? Small company, right? 4 very smart people. Well, 3 smart people and me. But, 4 people, we've done 16 courses in the last 3 months that are paid courses, quite expensive, and associated exams. We've been bragging about that a bit on LinkedIn, you might have seen. But it's critical. Like, you just have to keep challenging yourself. And, look, not a VCP level exam, not a massive challenge for a VCDX, fine. But it just keeps you up to date. And for me, if I do some training online, I'm on Partner University all the time, just doing little bits, double checking things. And if I get out of let's say I sit down for an hour and I just learn one new thing, and it might be one small thing, I'm very happy with that, because that one thing made me that little bit better. And it meant the outcome that I can achieve for a customer is just that little bit better. So you don't have to go to a course thinking you're going to learn this enormous amount for it to be valuable. And it's also good as a refresher to go through some of that content. And as you mentioned before with the evolution of products, like, depending on the version number, like, the feature changes. There's things that change. And I was having a great chat with James Worth the other day, and he was reading some of my blogs on vSAN. And he's like, oh, wow, a disk group fails when you enable dedupe and compression and you lose one drive. That's terrible. And then, like, he did a module of a course because he's studying for his exam for HCI Master. And he goes, oh, but in the next version, if it's compression, it's fine. So he was like, see, it is fine.
And that's the thing, right? Yeah, the products evolve, the technology evolves. What was popular 2 years could be by, it's on, on the downward spiral, today, and being able to keep up to date. Now, I will say, one of the reasons I got my VCDX is I never wanted to take another VCP test again, because I absolutely hated the VCPs. Because at least for me, I like I said, I mean, like, I started working with VMware technology in 2013, and I immediately started taking the VCPs, and I didn't have a huge amount of experience like day to day with it, and there were a lot of questions on those VCPs that I was like, wait, what? Why would that even be possible? And I just felt like, oh, so much of this is like stump the chump, at least a few years ago. Maybe it's not the case anymore, but now I just help write the tests. That's the way that I figured out to do, is like, oh, I'll go help the certification team write the next set of tests, and then I don't have to take the test. But yes.
So in that case, all the exams now are great. Yeah.
But even last week, like, I'm huge into Kubernetes right now, right? I mean, that's where the industry's going. As architects, we've got to understand how this is going to play out, how it's going to augment what we've been doing, how we're going to fit it in, and all of those things. So there were some like self-training free courses that Isovalent put out for their CNI for Kubernetes, called Cilium. And I love Cilium, not associated with them, but I think it's like I think of all of the CNIs, and I work at VMware, it's the best one out there. But they put out like a bunch of self-paced training classes, kind of like VMware Hands-On Labs, where it's self-guided. There's curriculum. They spin up a temporary lab where you have like a timeline or a time frame to finish each one in. And some of them took like 20 minutes. Some of them took like an hour. But it was like you said, like I looked at it like a couple of them. I went through like 20 minutes, didn't learn anything, just kind of went through the material. And then there were a couple others like on cluster mesh. I was like, it was 90 minutes of just like intense learning for me. And I came out at the end being like, wow, that was a great way for me to spend 90 minutes tonight while I was on PTO. Like that was a good investment of my time. And I think it goes back to, we have to be continuous learners, whether you're a certification junkie or just a training junkie, whatever it is, just always be learning. Don't just rest on your laurels and just say like, oh, I'm done. Right. And you're a small company. I think what you're doing is awesome, because I think you're feeling that there's a niche market for this right now. And
I wouldn't even say right now, actually. The funny thing is, I remember, I got to give credit. Like, it wasn't like it was my brilliant idea and, this is something unique. Like Mark Bronstad, myself, and other VCDXs and NPXs over many dinners and drinks over the years have talked about, oh, wouldn't it be great if there was a company that was just VCDXs and we just did things properly and we just did, all these things. And we're like, yeah, whatever. No, that's never going to happen. Right? No one's going to do that. No one's going to hire like 4 VCDXs and, they'd be crazy.
They'd be crazy to do that.
Yeah, I'm crazy enough to do that. Yes.
But that's good. I mean, like I said, like I think that there's such a need for this in our industry, and so much is changing, right? Like, and I'm not just talking like VMware stuff. I'm just talking just in general, right? Like Azure didn't exist how many years ago? 3 years ago, right? Or whatever it was. Now it's massive. The number of services that Azure's got is drastically on par with like an AWS, who's been around for almost 2 decades now, right? And and customers want to be able to pick and choose what they use, and they don't want to be tied. I mean, I hate the term vendor lock-in. I think that is singularly like the stupidest reason not to buy something from somebody, is because I don't want to be locked into you. I don't care if you put your data in AWS, you're locked into AWS. It's damn expensive to take that data out. They make it super easy for you to put it in, but if you want to take that data out, well, guess what? You're locked in. That whole like, oh, I'm cloud, I'm not locked in. Like, yes, you are. Your data is there. But
yeah, the first time I heard that term was I was working at IBM, so this is maybe 12 years ago or something like that, and I was recommending the N series, which is a NetApp rebrand. So IBM N series, NetApp, same thing. So, back in the day, big fan of NetApp. All right. I actually don't know what they're doing these days. I haven't kept up to date, but, big fan. And I said to a few customers, hey, they have Snap Manager technology. They can take the app consistent snaps, they can take it quickly, and then we can offload it somewhere else, take a mirror, and get you some continuity and do it really fast and all these things. And the first time I heard that term was, oh, but then we'd be locked in. What if we want to leave? I don't want to use that technology. It's great. It's really good. It's going to solve all our problems, but I'm not going to use it because then we're locked in, and we don't want lock-in. And I'm like, I haven't heard that term before. Don't act stupid. Don't look dumb. Just nod, act like you understand what they're talking about. And then, after I did that, I was like, that's the dumbest thing ever. You've got the opportunity to solve like an enormous number of problems, and them, just like pretty much every customer, has backup window issues, right? And they have data retention issues. They have performance issues with backups. They have all these problems that technology, mitigated to a significant level, and they didn't want to use it for some made up nonsense reason. Like, I think if you do a good job of integrating into a product, yes, if something drastically goes wrong, the company goes bust, or they put their prices up by 5x, yes, you're going to have to migrate away, or you're going to have to pay the bill. But that's a smallish risk. But what you're mitigating that risk with is making your organization inefficient 100%. Like, you are definitely going to have this issue of inefficiency for an extended period of time, or you might have to somehow get out of a difficult situation. I don't know. To me, I'd prefer to, create a great solution, keep it simple as much as possible, but create a great solution, use the tools available, and then have a strategy. Okay, we're using Snap Manager. How are we going to move away from that if and when it happens? Cool. Create that mitigation as part of your design and operations. But don't avoid using technology because it's a lock-in. I mean, these days, we've got so much choice where we can run workloads. And I think there's so many good options. And depending on the customer, one's going to be better than the other for whatever reason. But yeah, damn, the whole lock-in argument is, I don't know, it doesn't have a lot of credibility with me in most cases. Some cases, fine. But
I mean, I get it. And there's so much, like you said, there's so much technology out there. I'm a car guy. Okay. So, I mean, I have a garage full of tools, right? And I look at architecture and picking technology solutions the same way I look at, like, what tool do I need to use to fix this problem? If that 10 millimeter socket is the one that fixes the problem over and over and over again, I'm going to keep buying that 10 millimeter socket. And I don't care if it's Harbor Freight or Craftsman, but I'm going to get that 10 millimeter socket because that's what I need. And it needs to be the same way when we look at things like this with our architecture. Like, does vSAN work for you? Okay, great. Keep buying it, right? Like, does it not work for you? Okay, go buy the next thing, right? But don't worry about like, oh, well, I have all of my storage now on vSAN, and that's a problem because VMware is getting all of my money. But that's not an actual problem. And I think it goes back to like the BCDR conversation, I think, is kind of interesting, right? Like, I have a lot of customers. If you take your VCDX, there's a huge part on BCDR, and you have to be well versed in it, and maybe disregard a little bit about what I'm about to say. But so many times we look at the BCDR requirements that like an organization might have, and they're like, well, I've got to replicate my data to 3 different data centers, and I have copies everywhere, and if I fail over here, I can light it up over here and over here, and I'm like, okay, that's really nice, and that's pretty slick that you can do that, but what is the actual risk of you actually encountering a situation where you need to actually do that? Did you really need to make it that complicated, or could you have just said like something like, I'm going to SRM to one data center, and that's going to be good enough, right? And just call it good, versus, oh no, I need to replicate my data, across the line 3 different times, and it needs to be geographically redundant and all of this. I mean, I've seen some customers do some crazy things for like that like 0.0001% chance that they're going to hit this one thing that's going to have a cascading failure across everything. So